Kyoto, Japan, in an age where discipline meant survival, a young samurai named Teacher collapsed on the wooden floor of his dojo. It was not the dramatic fall of a man pushed beyond physical limits, but the quiet collapse of someone whose inner strength had already drained away. Sweat soaked his clothes, yet his muscles were not screaming in pain. What crushed him was heavier, invisible, and far more dangerous. His master, Yamamoto Sensei, stood above him without anger or concern, only clarity. "You are not tired because your body is weak," he said calmly. "You are tired because your spirit is carrying too much weight." Teacher had no answer. He had trained harder than anyone else in the dojo. He slept less, pushed further, ignored pain, and sacrificed comfort. By every measure, he was doing everything right. And yet, every morning he woke up exhausted, hollow, and burned out before the day even began. This exhaustion confused him deeply, because it made no sense in the way exhaustion was supposed to make sense. He was young, strong, disciplined, and ambitious. He believed tiredness was something that happened to the lazy, the unmotivated, or the weak. But here he was, surrounded by others who trained less intensely than he did, yet somehow still smiled, laughed, and carried lightness in their movements. Teacher felt none of that. Instead, he felt a constant pressure in his chest, as if every breath required effort. Sleep did not restore him. Victory did not satisfy him. Praise did not last. Something inside him was constantly leaking energy, though he could not see where or how. Across Japan, at that same moment in history, there lived a man whose life made Teishi's confusion even more unbearable. Miyamoto Musashi. A swordsman who fought over 60 life-or-death duels and never lost. A man who trained relentlessly, wandered constantly, lived with almost nothing, painted masterpieces, carved sculptures, wrote philosophy, and meditated for days without rest. By all logic, Musashi should have been broken long before old age. Yet history remembers him not as exhausted, but as unstoppable. While others burned out from ambition and fear, Musashi moved through life with a strange, almost frightening calm. The question was never how strong Musashi was. The real question was why his energy never left him. Teacher, like most people, believed energy came from effort. Work harder, push further, sacrifice more, and strength would appear. That belief had guided every decision of his life. It was why he stayed longer in training, punished himself for mistakes, and measured his worth by how much pain he could endure. But watching his own collapse forced an uncomfortable realization: effort alone was not creating energy, it was draining it. And if effort was not the source, then something else had to be. Yamamoto Sensei explained what no one had ever told Teacher before. "Your exhaustion does not come from what you do," he said. "It comes from why you do it." Those words struck harder than any sword. Teacher trained to be seen, to be praised, to be validated, to prove his worth. Every movement carried an invisible audience in his mind. Every success felt temporary, because it depended on others. Every failure felt crushing, because it threatened his identity. His spirit was split in two, one part acting, the other judging, comparing, and performing. That split, Yamamoto explained, drained energy faster than any physical labor. Musashi understood something modern minds still struggle to accept. Energy does not come from force. It comes from alignment. When your actions follow a straight path, energy flows naturally. When you chase approval, comparison, and recognition, you run in circles, bleeding strength with every step. The problem is not that people rest too little. The problem is that they live misaligned, carrying mental burdens that were never meant to be carried. As Teacher lay on the dojo floor, struggling to breathe, he realized this was not just about training. It was about his entire life. School, friendships, ambition, even discipline itself had been driven by a need to be seen. No amount of sleep could fix that. No vacation could heal it. The exhaustion he felt was not physical at all. It was the exhaustion of a spirit walking in the wrong direction. And in that moment, without fully understanding why, teacher sensed that Miyamoto Musashi's true secret had nothing to do with swords, strength, or endurance. It had everything to do with learning how to walk a straight path. Osaka, in the year 1640, marked the beginning of Tishi's true awakening. At 19, he arrived at Master Yamamoto's dojo with the fire of ambition burning bright in his chest. He carried talent, discipline, and an unshakable belief that effort alone could carve greatness into existence. The wooden gates of the dojo felt like a promise: endure enough pain, sacrifice enough comfort, and honor would be guaranteed. For the first few weeks, Tisha thrived. His body adapted quickly. His technique sharpened. Other students noticed his intensity. Yet beneath that outward progress, something quietly began to decay. By the 6th month, the exhaustion returned, heavier than before. This was not the soreness of muscles after long training. It was a dull, constant pressure that followed him everywhere. He woke up tired. He trained tired. He ate tired. He slept tired. No amount of rest dissolved it. The more he pushed himself, the more empty he felt, as if effort was draining something vital rather than building it. One evening, after collapsing onto the tatami mats, Tisha whispered the question he had been afraid to ask. "Why am I like this?" His training partner, Kenji, offered a shrug instead of comfort. "You're not the first," he said. "Many arrive with fire and leave as ash." Those words haunted Tisha, because he could already feel himself turning to ash. His discipline had become mechanical. His training felt forced. Even victories brought no joy, only relief that he had not failed. One night, after a brutal sparring session where he was defeated by a student he knew he was better than, Master Yamamoto approached him. "Walk with me," the old master said. They left the noise of the dojo and stepped into a quiet garden behind it. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the stone path. Silence followed them, heavy but intentional. Yamamoto stopped near a small pond and asked a simple question. "Why did you come here, Tisha?" The answer seemed obvious. "To become a great samurai," Tisha replied. Yamamoto nodded once. "Why?" Tisha hesitated. No one had ever pressed further. After a pause, the truth spilled out. To bring honor to his family. To prove himself. To be recognized. Yamamoto raised his hand gently. "Stop." His voice was calm, but final. "You came here to gain approval. To be seen. To prove your worth." Tisha felt exposed, as if something private had been pulled into the open. "That," Yamamoto continued, "is why you are exhausted." The words landed with unsettling clarity. You are not training to master yourself. You are performing for an audience that is not even watching. The master knelt, picked up a small stone, and placed it into Tishi's palm. Every time you train for approval, you carry one of these. Every time you compare yourself, another. Every time you overthink, hesitate, or try to impress, another. Though Yamamoto placed nothing more than air into his hand, Tisha felt the weight grow heavier with each imagined stone. "You are not tired from training," Yamamoto said quietly. "You are tired from carrying stones that serve no purpose." Tisha looked down at his empty hand, yet his arm felt heavy. Yamamoto then spoke the name that would change everything. Miyamoto Musashi fought over 60 duels, many to the death, and never burned out. "Do you know why?" Tisha shook his head. "Because Musashi fought to understand himself, not to prove himself. He carried no stones." That night, Tisha lay awake, unable to escape the truth. His exhaustion had not begun at the dojo. It had followed him his entire life. Every exam taken to impress. Every achievement chased for validation. Every effort fueled by fear of being unseen. He had never walked his own path. He had only chased approval. The next morning, Yamamoto announced his decision. Teacher would spend 1 year not learning sword techniques, but learning alignment. The way of walking alone. Teacher did not yet understand what that meant, but for the first time in months, he felt something unfamiliar stirring within him. Hope, light, and the possibility that his exhaustion was not a weakness, but a message. The third phase of Tishi's transformation began not with motion, but with subtraction. At dawn the following day, Master Yamamoto led him into a dim storage room behind the dojo. Shelves were stacked high with armor, spare swords, scrolls, tools, blankets, travel packs, and supplies accumulated over decades. For 1 year, Yamamoto said, you will live as Miyamoto Musashi lived. Take what you need. Tishi's instincts immediately took control. He gathered extra clothes, writing tools, food supplies, a spare blade, books, blankets, and personal items meant to provide comfort. Within minutes, a large pile formed at his feet. Yamamoto observed silently, then spoke. Now remove everything of no use. Tisha hesitated. But master, I might need these. Yamamoto's eyes did not harden, but his voice sharpened with truth. Musashi wrote, do nothing which is of no use. Every possession is a weight. Every attachment is a chain. Tisha began removing items reluctantly. One blanket went back. Then the books. Then the spare clothes. More, Yamamoto said. The pile shrank again. More. Eventually, Tisha stood before only one sword, one set of clothes, one bowl, and one blanket. The room felt strangely quiet, as if something invisible had been cleared away. They walked into a grove where the ground was bare and the air still. Yamamoto sat across from Tisha and drew two figures in the dirt. One was hunched beneath a massive boulder, knees buckling, spine bent. The other walked upright, empty-handed, eyes forward. Most people, Yamamoto said, believe strength comes from learning to carry more. Musashi understood strength comes from carrying less. He looked directly at Tisha. Your exhaustion does not come from effort. It comes from unnecessary weight. Tisha felt resistance rise in his chest. But how do I know what is unnecessary? Yamamoto smiled faintly. That question is the practice. He explained that Musashi examined every thought, every possession, every commitment with ruthless honesty. Is this useful to my path? If not, it is removed. No sentiment. No guilt. No hesitation. This was not cruelty. It was survival. In battle, excess movement meant death. In life, excess attachment meant exhaustion. As the sun climbed higher, Yamamoto spoke of Dodo, the way of walking alone. Not lonely, but alone. Walking without dragging the expectations of others behind you. Most exhaustion, he said, comes from living divided. One foot on your path, the other on someone else's. Tisha realized how often he measured himself against others, how frequently his decisions were shaped by imagined judgment. Each comparison was another stone. Each performance another leak of energy. Yamamoto's voice softened. Musashi slept on floors, traveled lightly, and owned almost nothing. People thought him strange. They were wrong. He was free. Energy does not come from accumulation. It comes from alignment. Tisha felt the truth of this settle deep within him. His mind replayed years of effort spent chasing approval that vanished as soon as it was gained. He saw how every maybe, every what if, every attempt to impress had fractured his focus. Before leaving the grove, Yamamoto delivered a warning. This practice will feel uncomfortable. You will feel exposed without your stones. But discomfort is not exhaustion. Resistance is. Tisha bowed deeply. That night, as he lay on the floor with only a blanket beneath him, he felt something unfamiliar, quiet. The usual noise of comparison, anticipation, and self-judgment was softer. Not gone, but distant. For the first time, rest did not feel like escape. It felt like alignment. Teacher did not yet feel powerful. He did not feel enlightened. But he felt lighter. And in that lightness, he sensed the first real clue to Musashi's secret. Energy was never missing. It had only been buried beneath weight that never belonged to him. The fourth phase of Tishi's training began with silence so complete it felt unnatural. At dawn, Master Yamamoto took him beyond the dojo, past the familiar paths and training grounds, deep into the cedar forest where the air grew cold and the light thinned into narrow blades between the trees. No instructions were given. No lessons explained. Yamamoto simply stopped, placed a small wooden marker into the soil, and said, "You will return here every day for 30 days. You will sit. You will not seek insight. You will not fight your thoughts. You will not follow them. You will endure." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Teacher alone with the forest and his own mind. At first, Teacher believed this would be easy. He had trained his body to withstand pain, hunger, fatigue. Sitting seemed trivial by comparison. But within minutes, discomfort rose. His legs burned. His back stiffened. Worse than the physical strain was the flood of thoughts that surged forward the moment action ceased. Regrets replayed themselves. Imagined futures demanded attention. Old conversations resurfaced with sharper edges than before. His mind felt louder here than it ever had during battle. He shifted, adjusted, clenched his jaw. Nothing helped. By the fifth day, frustration had replaced patience. Teacher wanted to do something, anything. His instincts screamed that effort was the solution. Focus harder. Control the mind. Force stillness. Yet every attempt only amplified the chaos. The harder he tried to silence his thoughts, the more violently they resisted. He remembered Yamamoto's words, "Do not seek insight." But this felt like surrender, and surrender felt like failure. Each morning, he returned to the marker with a tightening knot in his chest, already exhausted before the practice began. On the seventh day, something broke, not dramatically, but quietly. After an hour of restless struggle, Teacher reached the edge of his will. There was no strength left to resist. His posture softened. His breathing slowed, not by intention, but by necessity. Thoughts still appeared, but he no longer chased them or fought them. They rose, lingered, and passed like mist through the trees. For brief moments, there was nothing to fix, nothing to achieve. Just presence. Those moments terrified him more than the noise ever had. When Yamamoto finally returned on the 10th day, he did not ask how Teacher felt. He only said, "Most people think discipline is control. It is not. Discipline is the ability to remain without interference." He explained that Musashi trained his mind the way he trained his sword, by removing excess movement. Every unnecessary thought was like an extra flourish in combat, impressive, exhausting, and lethal under pressure. Silence was not the absence of thought, but the refusal to obey every one. Days passed, marked only by the shifting light and the gradual softening of resistance. Teacher began to notice patterns. Certain thoughts repeated themselves with mechanical predictability. Worries wore the same faces each day. Desires rose and fell without action. He saw how little of his inner noise was actually required for survival. Most of it was habit, mental muscle memory formed by fear and comparison. Watching these patterns without judgment slowly dissolved their power. By the third week, Tishi's sitting no longer felt like endurance. It became a form of sharpening. His senses grew clearer. The sound of wind through branches separated into layers. He could feel the precise point where breath turned into stillness. More importantly, he carried this clarity beyond the forest. During physical training, his movements became cleaner, more economical. He no longer wasted energy anticipating mistakes. He simply moved. On the final day, Yamamoto stood beside him as he rose from the ground. "You have learned the difference between exhaustion and emptiness, the master said. Exhaustion comes from resistance. Emptiness is strength. Teacher bowed, understanding now that stillness was not retreat, it was preparation. Musashi's mind had not been calm because the world was quiet. It was calm because he had learned which battles did not deserve a response. The fifth phase of Tishi's discipline was revealed not through a new technique, but through repetition stripped of reward. One morning, Master Yamamoto handed him a wooden sword worn smooth by decades of use and pointed toward the practice yard. There were no opponents waiting, no audience, no instructions beyond a single command: strike. Teacher expected clarification: how many times, which form, what purpose, but none came. Yamamoto turned away, leaving him alone beneath the open sky with nothing but the weight of monotony. Teacher began with familiar forms, clean and precise. Each strike cut through the air with practiced accuracy. At first, the movement felt grounding. Then minutes stretched into hours. Sweat soaked his clothes. His arms trembled. The absence of feedback gnawed at him. No correction. No praise. No visible progress. His mind searched desperately for meaning. Is this improving me? Am I wasting time? The questions grew louder as his strength faded. By the third day, frustration eclipsed fatigue. Teacher realized that most of his motivation had always been tied to response: an opponent reacting, a teacher observing, a measurable outcome confirming effort. Here, there was nothing. Just the act itself, repeated endlessly. He considered stopping early. No one would know. The thought lingered, seductive and rational. That was when Yamamoto returned, watching silently from the edge of the yard. After Teacher finished, Yamamoto spoke without warmth or criticism. You stopped when the mind questioned the value, he said. Musashi trained beyond that point. He explained that most people abandon discipline not because they are weak, but because they are addicted to feedback. They require signs of progress to continue. Musashi severed that dependence. He practiced as if no result would ever arrive. In doing so, every movement became honest. The following sessions were harder. Yamamoto instructed Teacher to strike the same target, the same angle, at the same pace, for entire mornings. No variation. No creativity. The sword grew heavier with each repetition. Pain flared in joints and muscles. But the real strain came from boredom. Time slowed. Thoughts wandered. Doubt returned, whispering that intelligence meant efficiency, not endless repetition. Yet Yamamoto offered no alternatives. Gradually, something shifted. As the mind exhausted its complaints, Teacher noticed subtleties he had previously ignored. The exact moment tension entered his grip. The slight misalignment of his hips. The wasted effort in his shoulders. Repetition became a mirror. Every flaw surfaced, undeniable and exposed. Without distraction, improvement happened naturally, not through ambition, but through awareness. Yamamoto explained that Musashi called this polishing the stone. You do not strike harder. You strike longer. The stone shapes itself through contact, not intention. Most people want intensity, the master said. Musashi wanted inevitability. Consistency, practiced without emotional attachment, transformed effort into identity. You no longer trained to become disciplined. You trained because discipline was who you were. By the end of the phase, Teacher no longer counted strikes. He no longer wondered how long he had been practicing. The action continued whether he liked it or not. Fatigue still arrived, but it no longer carried frustration. Pain existed without drama. The practice stripped effort down to its simplest form: show up, repeat, remain. On the final morning, Yamamoto watched Teacher complete his strikes, then nodded once. You have learned why most people quit, he said. Not because the path is hard, but because it is quiet. Teacher understood. Discipline was not fueled by motivation. Motivation burned out. Discipline was built through repetition so deep that quitting no longer felt like an option. The sixth phase began where comfort ended. Master Yamamoto woke Teacher long before dawn and led him to the edge of the mountains, where the wind cut sharply and the ground sloped unevenly beneath their feet. There was no explanation, only a command, walk. They climbed in silence for hours, carrying no supplies, stopping for no rest. When Tishi's legs began to ache and his breath grew shallow, Yamamoto did not slow. The pace was steady, unyielding, indifferent to struggle. As fatigue set in, Tisha noticed an old pattern return, the urge to negotiate with discomfort. Just a short pause. Just a slower step. Each thought arrived dressed as reason, but beneath it lay fear. Fear of pain. Fear of failure. Fear of discovering limits he could not escape. Yamamoto eventually stopped and turned to face him. Musashi wrote, he said, endure without complaint. This is not poetry. It is instruction. They resumed walking. No encouragement followed. No threats. Only movement. Tishi's body screamed for relief, but something else began to surface beneath the noise. When resistance faded, rhythm emerged. Breath synchronized with steps. Pain stopped demanding attention and became background sensation. He was still tired, but no longer fighting tiredness. The difference was subtle and transformative. At a narrow ridge, Yamamoto halted again. Most people confuse suffering with harm, he said. Suffering is resistance. Harm is damage. Musashi endured suffering daily so he could recognize harm instantly. Tisha understood now why complaint drained energy faster than effort. Every protest tightened the body, shortened breath, scattered focus. Silence conserved strength. The descent was worse. Muscles already weakened trembled under the strain. Yet Tisha noticed something new. He recovered faster when he stopped labeling pain as a problem. The moment he accepted discomfort as part of motion, it loosened its grip. Yamamoto watched closely, saying nothing, allowing experience to teach what words could not. By nightfall, they returned to the dojo. Tisha collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but clear. He expected praise or evaluation. None came. Instead, Yamamoto left him with a final sentence: you will face greater pain in life than this. Decide now whether you will waste energy resisting it. In the days that followed, Tisha carried this lesson into every practice. When fear appeared, he did not argue. When discomfort rose, he did not dramatize. Endurance was no longer about toughness. It was about efficiency. Musashi's strength had not come from ignoring pain, but from refusing to make it larger than it was. Tisha realized that giving up was rarely a sudden decision. It was the result of thousands of small complaints that weakened resolve over time. By removing complaint, endurance became natural. And in that endurance, he felt a quiet certainty grow, one that did not shout, did not rush, and did not break. The seventh phase of Tishi's training confronted the most dangerous enemy of all, urgency. One evening, as rain pressed heavily against the roof of the dojo, Master Yamamoto placed a single candle between them. Its flame wavered in the moving air, fragile and alive. Tonight, he said, you will learn why haste destroys more warriors than fear. Tisha listened closely, expecting another physical trial, but none came. Instead, Yamamoto told him to watch the flame, nothing more. At first, the task felt meaningless. Tishi's instincts pushed him toward action. Stillness had already been tested, endurance had been proven. But simply watching felt passive, almost indulgent. As minutes passed, his mind rushed ahead, rehearsing tomorrow's training, replaying old mistakes, predicting outcomes that did not yet exist. The flame blurred at the edges as his attention fractured. Yamamoto's voice cut softly through the noise. Notice how your mind outruns the present. The lesson unfolded slowly. Yamamoto explained that urgency was not speed, it was fear disguised as importance. People rush not because time demands it, but because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. Musashi understood this deeply. In duels, he appeared slow, even careless, until the decisive moment. His opponents mistook calm for hesitation and urgency for advantage. They struck early. They exposed themselves. He ended the fight. Each night, Tisha returned to the candle. He noticed how the urge to intervene, to adjust, to control, to anticipate, arose without invitation. Urgency whispered that stillness meant falling behind. But as he stayed, something unexpected happened. The longer he remained present, the less time seemed to matter. Moments expanded. Decisions clarified. Action, when it came, felt precise rather than rushed. Yamamoto later took Tisha into sparring sessions with a cruel rule: Tisha was forbidden to initiate. He could only respond. At first, this felt like a handicap. Opponents pressed aggressively, attempting to overwhelm him with speed. But as Tisha waited, watched, and conserved motion, gaps revealed themselves. The fastest strikes were the sloppiest. The first mover was often the most vulnerable. Urgency is a tax on perception, Yamamoto said. It narrows vision. Musashi delayed not out of caution, but confidence. He trusted that the right moment would reveal itself, if the mind did not panic first. Tisha saw now how many of his past failures came not from lack of skill, but from premature action driven by anxiety. By the end of the phase, Tishi's relationship with time had shifted. He no longer felt chased by it. He felt alive. On the final night, Yamamoto extinguished the candle with his fingers. "Move only when the moment asks," he said. Tisha bowed, understanding that mastery was not about acting faster than others, but about refusing to be rushed by fear. The eighth phase of Tishi's discipline focused on solitude, the kind that strips away identity rather than comforts it. One morning, Master Yamamoto instructed Tisha to leave the dojo with no destination and no return time. He was given no tasks, no schedule, and no guidance beyond a single warning: do not distract yourself. There would be no training partners, no structure, no authority watching. Only time, silence, and the self he usually avoided. At first, the freedom felt intoxicating. Tisha walked through villages, forests, and open fields, observing people move through their routines. Without obligation, his pace slowed. But soon, discomfort replaced ease. Without roles to perform or progress to measure, questions surfaced. Who am I when no one is watching? What remains when discipline is no longer demanded? The mind searched for stimulation, conversation, noise, purpose, anything to escape the void. By the second day, restlessness sharpened. Tisha realized how often his sense of worth had been reinforced externally, by instruction, competition, validation. Alone, those structures dissolved. He felt invisible. Insignificant. The urge to return early tugged at him, rational and persuasive. But Yamamoto's warning echoed in his mind. Distraction was not allowed. As hours turned into days, something subtle occurred. Without constant input, Tisha began to notice his own patterns of thought as separate from himself. Desires rose and fell without being fulfilled. Fears appeared, argued their case, and dissolved. Identity loosened. He was no longer the student, the warrior, or the disciplined one. He was simply present. Yamamoto later explained that Musashi spent years wandering alone for this reason. Solitude was not escape, it was calibration. When identity is built only in relation to others, it collapses under pressure. Musashi forged a self that did not require agreement or applause. Alone, he refined intention without interference. When Tisha finally returned to the dojo, he felt quieter inside. Not empty, but unburdened. He no longer felt the need to announce progress or prove resilience. Discipline had moved from performance to essence. Yamamoto observed him closely and nodded. "You can now be alone without being lost," he said. Teacher understood that solitude was not a phase, it was a tool. One that sharpened clarity, dissolved dependency, and revealed whether discipline was real or merely rehearsed. And in that solitude, he found a strength that did not seek witnesses. The ninth phase revealed the final illusion Teacher had to confront: control. Until now, every lesson, silence, endurance, repetition, patience, had strengthened his sense of agency. He felt sharper, steadier, more capable. But Master Yamamoto warned him that this confidence carried a hidden danger. The moment you believe you command outcomes, he said, you become brittle. Teacher did not fully understand, but he listened. Yamamoto led him to a river swollen by recent rain. The water moved fast, chaotic, striking stones without hesitation. Cross, Yamamoto said. There were no stepping stones, no guidance, no technique offered. Teacher entered cautiously, testing each step. The current pushed hard, forcing constant adjustment. Every attempt to impose control, forcing direction, tightening muscles, nearly unbalanced him. The river punished rigidity. After several failures, Teacher noticed a pattern. When he stiffened, he slipped. When he fought the current, he exhausted himself. But when he softened, when he allowed the water to move around him instead of against him, balance returned. He advanced not by domination, but by cooperation. The crossing was still difficult, but it no longer felt hostile. On the far bank, Yamamoto spoke quietly. Musashi did not seek control. He sought harmony with reality. In combat, this meant reading the opponent rather than forcing a plan. In life, it meant adapting without attachment to outcome. Control demanded certainty. Harmony required awareness. In the following days, Yamamoto designed practices that intentionally disrupted Teishi's expectations. Training schedules changed without warning. Instructions contradicted previous lessons. Progress appeared to stall. Teacher felt frustration rise, not from failure, but from unpredictability. He recognized the impulse to demand structure, to restore the illusion of command. Yamamoto refused to give it. Reality does not owe you consistency, the master said. Your discipline must survive disorder. Teacher began to see how clinging to control had once made him anxious and rigid. He had believed mastery meant certainty. Musashi understood mastery meant flexibility. As this phase deepened, Teishi's actions became more responsive. He stopped planning several moves ahead. He listened. He adjusted. When mistakes happened, he corrected without self-attack. When success arrived, he did not cling to it. The emotional spikes flattened. What remained was stability. On the final day, Yamamoto returned them to the river. Teacher crossed again, this time with fewer slips, less effort. Not because the water had changed, but because he had. Yamamoto bowed slightly. You no longer need control to move forward, he said. Teacher understood then that giving up was often a reaction to losing control. When outcomes become unpredictable, people retreat. But by releasing control, he had gained something stronger: adaptability. And adaptability, he realized, was the true mark of an unstoppable mind. The final phase did not arrive with ceremony. There was no announcement, no dramatic test, no declaration that Teacher had reached the end. One morning, Master Yamamoto simply did not appear. The dojo was silent. The yard empty. The routines unchanged. Teacher waited, then trained, then waited again. Hours passed. Nothing happened. For the first time since his training began, there was no authority shaping the day. At first, unease crept in. Without instruction, Teacher felt the old pull toward uncertainty. Am I finished? Am I supposed to do something different? The mind searched for direction, for validation, for a signal that progress still existed. But nothing came. And slowly, something important revealed itself. He continued anyway. He practiced without supervision. He sat without being told. He walked without purpose, endured discomfort without framing it as training, and remained present without calling it discipline. The habits no longer required reinforcement. They had become natural, almost invisible. What once demanded effort now felt like alignment. Days later, Yamamoto returned. He watched from a distance as Teacher trained, offering no correction. When the session ended, the master approached and bowed, not deeply, but sincerely. "You no longer need a teacher," he said. And that is the only moment a teacher succeeds. Teacher felt no surge of pride. No relief. Only clarity. He understood now that the forbidden technique was never a secret move or hidden rule. It was the removal of dependence. Musashi became unstoppable not because he never felt weakness, doubt, or exhaustion, but because none of those dictated his actions. He moved whether conditions were favorable or not. Yamamoto spoke one final time. Most people give up because they are waiting to feel ready, motivated, or certain. Musashi acted without negotiating with his state. When the mind was broken, he stood anyway. When discipline felt empty, he remained anyway. That is the rule. As Yamamoto turned to leave, Teacher did not ask questions. He did not seek reassurance. The path was clear, not because it was easy, but because it no longer required permission. Discipline was no longer something he practiced. It was something he inhabited. Teacher stepped into the yard alone. The wind moved through the trees. The world continued, indifferent and unchanged. And yet, something was different. There was no urge to prove, no fear of collapse, no need to begin again. If the mind broke, he would stand. If doubt returned, he would remain. If the path grew silent, he would walk it. That was the final lesson. Never giving up was not an act of force. It was the quiet refusal to abandon yourself, no matter the condition of the mind.